On a frozen Chicago night, a taxi driver answered a call that sounded wrong from the very first breath. Fear trembled on the line, and God was already listening. Inside a luxury restaurant, a girl in red was running for her life, hunted by 5 masked men with silenced guns, while everyone else pretended nothing was wrong. The driver was a retired Navy SEAL, broken by war, haunted by the past. He could have driven away. But faith whispered louder than fear. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from, and subscribe for more stories of faith, courage, and the miracles God hides in the darkest places. Jack Miller had learned to listen to silence. Not the quiet kind, never that, but the kind that pressed in from all sides, heavy with the promise that something was about to break. Chicago winters carried that silence well. Snow absorbed sound, softened edges, and hid intentions. It made the city look forgiving while reminding men like Jack that forgiveness was never free. He drove with both hands steady on the wheel, eyes forward, breath measured. Taxi work suited him more than people assumed. It gave his mind something simple to do, lanes, lights, fares, while keeping the old ghosts occupied. When the nightmares came, they came later, in the privacy of dark rooms and colder memories. For now, there was the road. The dog shifted in the passenger seat. Jack didn't look over. He didn't need to. He felt the alertness ripple beside him, the quiet readiness that had once lived in his own body before it learned fear by name. The dog had learned the city's rhythms quickly, which streets hummed wrong, which pauses were too long, which voices carried lies. Tonight, the dog sensed something gathering. The dispatch tablet chimed once. A private request, high fare, pick up at a luxury restaurant along the river. Jack considered ignoring it. He had promised himself fewer late calls, fewer nights that ended with his heart hammering for reasons he couldn't explain. But the city had a way of tugging at the frayed threads of a man's resolve. He tapped accept. The phone rang almost immediately. The voice on the other end was older, polished by years of command and money, yet frayed at the edges like fabric rubbed thin. She spoke quickly, then stopped, as if listening for something Jack couldn't hear. "I've booked a taxi," she said. "I'll need you to pull up slowly. Don't come inside. And when you see me, don't acknowledge me." Jack felt his jaw tighten. A familiar weight settled behind his eyes. "There's a young woman here," the caller continued, lowering her voice. "If she signals you, please. That's all I can say." The line went dead. Jack stared at the phone for a moment longer than necessary. He told himself it was none of his business. People with money collected drama the way others collected snow on their coats, unnoticed, inevitable. He should drive, pick up the fare, keep quiet. But his hands had already tightened on the wheel. The dog made a low sound, not a growl, more a question. Jack exhaled. "I know," he murmured, unsure whether he was speaking to the dog or to himself. As the taxi approached the riverfront, light spilled from the restaurant's tall windows, gold against the blue-white night. Valets moved with practiced ease. Laughter drifted out in brief bursts when the doors opened, then vanished again into warmth. Jack slowed. That's when he saw her. The girl in red burst into view at the edge of the glass, moving too fast, too wrong for the place. Her coat flared as she turned, eyes wide, mouth open in a soundless plea. Behind her, 5 figures emerged, not rushing, not panicked, controlled, faces hidden. Purpose clear even at a distance. Jack's breath caught. His mind did what it always did when danger arrived uninvited. It split. One part catalogued exits, distances, obstacles. The other screamed for him to leave, to remember the nights when sirens meant bodies and bodies meant names carved into metal. The dog rose, bristling with intent, gaze locked on the restaurant doors. "Stay," Jack said softly, though he didn't know who the command was for anymore. The masked men didn't follow the girl outside. Not yet. They melted back into the glow, patient as winter. Jack's phone buzzed. A different number. He answered without speaking, breathing, shallow, fast. "I can't leave," a young voice whispered. "They're here. Please. You said you were close." Jack closed his eyes. He felt the past clawing up from the deep places, the sand, the heat, the radio calls that never came back answered. He had left that life behind. He had paid his dues in sleepless nights and pills he didn't always take. "I'm a taxi driver," he said, trying to anchor himself to the present. "I can call the police." "They'll hear," she said. "They're watching everything." The dog whined once, low and urgent. Jack opened his eyes. Through the glass, he saw movement again. A tall man stepped into view, posture relaxed, confidence worn like a tailored coat. He didn't raise his weapon. He didn't need to. Control radiated from him. The man's gaze flicked toward the street and lingered on the taxi. Jack felt the old, cold recognition settle in his bones. This wasn't a robbery. This wasn't panic. This was a hunt. "Listen to me," Jack said into the phone. "I'm going to come inside. I won't look for you. You find me." Silence. Then a breath. "Okay." The call ended. Jack rested his forehead briefly against the steering wheel. He thought of the promises he'd made, to stay invisible, to survive quietly. He thought of the years when doing nothing had seemed like the safest option, and how it had hollowed him out all the same. He straightened. The dog watched him, tail still, eyes bright with the fierce calm of purpose. "Guard the car," Jack said. The words felt ceremonial, like crossing a line he'd pretended wasn't there. The dog pressed its forehead briefly against Jack's knee, then settled, alert and waiting. Inside the restaurant, warmth hit Jack like a wave. Music played softly. Glassware chimed. No one looked at him twice. He was just another working man out of place among expense and ease. He moved slowly, deliberately, letting the rhythm of the room sink in, the way chairs were spaced, the way the staff avoided one corner without knowing why, the way the air felt thinner near the back hallway. And then he felt it, that prickle along his spine, the sense of being measured. Jack turned. The tall man stood a few paces away now, eyes sharp, expression almost amused. In his hand, partially concealed, was the unmistakable shape of a suppressed pistol. Time stretched. Jack's heart began to pound, loud as gunfire in his ears. He tasted metal. The room seemed to tilt, memories bleeding into the present. He reminded himself where he was. He counted breaths. He grounded himself in the cold of the night, waiting outside. The man smiled faintly. Jack knew that smile. It was the smile of someone who believed the outcome had already been decided. Somewhere behind Jack, a chair scraped, a soft gasp, the girl in red. Jack didn't turn, not yet. Instead, he made a choice, not a heroic one, not a noble one, just a familiar one, the kind made by men who had learned that sometimes the worst thing you could do was walk away. Outside, snow continued to fall, patient and unknowing, and inside, the silence finally broke. Snow pressed against the restaurant windows as warmth and music struggled to pretend nothing was wrong, a fragile shell holding back the quiet geometry of violence. Jack did not move when the man with the suppressed pistol met his eyes. He felt the familiar internal fracture open again, the clean split between memory and now, between the instinct to survive and the older instinct that had once taught him to step forward when everyone else stepped aside. The room smelled of wine and polished wood, and that normality felt obscene. His heart hammered hard enough that he worried someone might hear it, might trace the sound back to him like a target. He reminded himself to breathe, to feel the floor through his boots, to anchor to the present instead of the deserts and alleys his mind kept offering as substitutes. The man's confidence was not loud, it was precise, practiced, and Jack recognized it the way one veteran recognizes another without exchanging words. This was not bravado, this was rehearsal. Jack's first thought was not fear, but anger, sharp and brief, that such men always chose places like this, places full of people who believed safety could be bought with chandeliers and reservations. Somewhere behind him the girl in red shifted, and Jack felt the pull of her fear like a hand on his spine. He did not turn. He did not acknowledge her. The woman who had called him had been clear, and clarity mattered in moments like this. He took a step sideways instead, as if confused, as if searching for a table, and in that small motion he measured distance, angles, the weight of attention on his back. The man's pistol remained low, almost polite, its presence an unspoken sentence. Jack's mind raced, not toward heroics, but toward options, all of them poor. He could shout, but sound would be swallowed by music, and panic would bloom faster than help. He could rush the man, but the others he had glimpsed earlier would respond with efficient finality. He could leave, and that thought cut deepest, because it was the one his damaged nerves wanted most. He tasted copper and realized he had bitten his tongue. The dog's absence pressed against him. He could almost feel the animal's focused waiting outside, the trust implied by staying when told. That trust steadied him more than any mantra a therapist had ever offered. The man finally spoke, voice low, friendly in the way of someone offering a correction. Jack did not register the words so much as the tone, the assurance that nothing Jack did would change the outcome. That assurance triggered a memory he wished he could forget. A night years ago when a similar tone had preceded a radio call that never came back, answered. He forced the memory down and answered with a shrug, a muttered apology, the performance of harmlessness he had perfected since trading uniforms for fares. The man's eyes flicked past Jack, assessing, recalculating, and in that fraction of a second Jack felt the attention shift. Away from the girl. He moved again, clumsier this time, bumping a chair, drawing a few annoyed glances from diners who had not yet learned how close they were to the edge of a story they would later deny believing. A server approached, uncertain, and Jack raised a hand in a small gesture that said nothing, that meant everything. And the server hesitated, then retreated, intuition overriding training. Jack's phone vibrated in his pocket, the girl's number lighting the screen. He did not answer. He could not. Instead, he let the vibration remind him that the girl was still hidden, still hoping, and that hope was a weight he had accepted the moment he crossed the threshold. The man with the pistol shifted his stance, a subtle change, and Jack felt the room tighten around them. Somewhere deeper in the restaurant, he sensed movement, the other men adjusting, sealing paths without drawing attention. The geometry of it all was almost beautiful in its cruelty. Jack's thoughts turned briefly to the woman who had called him, to the way power had not saved her from fear, and he wondered how many times he had mistaken distance from danger for immunity. He wondered how many nights he had driven past people needing help because the rules of his new life demanded it. He took another breath and did something that surprised even him. He spoke, not loudly, not bravely, just enough to be heard by the man alone, a simple line about being lost, about looking for the restroom, about not wanting trouble. The man smiled again, thinner now, and raised the pistol just enough for Jack to see the intent behind it. That was when the girl in red made her mistake, a small, involuntary sound pulled from her by terror. The sound was tiny, but it cut through the music like glass. The man's eyes snapped toward it, and Jack understood that the fragile balance he had been holding was gone. He acted without planning, driven by a decision already made long before this night, long before this restaurant, a decision about who he would be when silence demanded complicity. He stepped into the man's line, hands up, voice calm, forcing attention back onto himself, buying a second that felt like a lifetime. In that second he knew this would not end quietly, that whatever came next would follow him beyond this room, beyond this winter, and he accepted it with a strange, exhausted relief. Outside he imagined the dog's patience tightening into readiness, a mirror of his own resolve. Inside, the man's finger settled on the trigger, and Jack felt the room inhale, waiting to see who would break first. Snow thickened outside the service doors as tension inside the restaurant tightened, every polished surface reflecting a truth no one wanted to see. The sound that escaped the girl in red was small, almost apologetic, yet it landed with the force of a detonation inside Jack Miller's chest. Time did not slow the way movies promised. It fractured instead, splintering into sharp moments he had to step through carefully or bleed. Victor's attention snapped fully toward the sound, and in that instant Jack understood something essential. Control had shifted, and once shifted, it never returned quietly. Jack spoke again, softer now, as if embarrassed by his own presence, as if he were just another inconvenience in an expensive night. He kept his voice steady, even as his pulse roared in his ears. He felt his body preparing for impact, muscles tensing in patterns learned long before taxi routes and late-night fares. PTSD tried to hijack the moment, offering images of alleys, dust, radios screaming for help that never arrived, but Jack forced his focus onto what was real, the distance between himself and Victor, the placement of tables, the faint tremor in the girl's breath. He stepped closer to Victor, not aggressively but deliberately, narrowing the angles available to the gun without announcing the tactic. It was a dangerous gamble, one that relied on Victor's confidence in his own superiority, and Jack hated himself for how familiar that calculation felt. Around them, diners began to sense something was wrong, though no one yet understood what. Unease crept across faces like a shadow passing over water. A couple stood, then sat again, unsure which instinct to trust. Jack remembered a training instructor once telling him that most people froze not because they were weak, but because they were polite, because they assumed someone else would explain what was happening. Victor shifted his weight, and Jack caught a glimpse of movement deeper in the restaurant, the others repositioning with quiet efficiency. The hunt was closing. Jack's mind raced through options that all ended the same way if he failed to create space. He thought of the dog outside, waiting because Jack had asked it to, and the thought carried a weight of responsibility that cut through the noise. Loyalty, Jack realized, was not a feeling. It was an action repeated even when fear made no sense of it. He took another step, then another, speaking nonsense about directions and restrooms, letting Victor believe this interruption was beneath him. Victor's smile returned, colder now, and Jack recognized the look as permission granted internally to remove an obstacle. The girl in red was crying silently now, hands pressed to her mouth, eyes locked on Jack as if he were the last solid thing in a dissolving world. Jack wanted to tell her not to look, to keep still, to survive this moment by shrinking, but he knew that advice was already too late. A chair scraped loudly as someone finally stood with purpose, and the sound rippled through the room, panic beginning to wake. Victor's finger tightened. Jack acted. He moved sharply to one side, colliding with a waiter's tray, glass shattering across the floor, wine spilling dark against white. The noise was sudden, overwhelming, and for a fraction of a second it stole attention from intent. Jack used that fraction the way he had been taught, stepping into Victor's space just enough to force recalculation without contact. He felt the heat of the weapon close to his body, felt how easily the moment could end, and accepted that fear was no longer useful. He spoke the girl's name for the first time, quietly, just loud enough for her to hear. A signal rather than a comfort, and nodded once toward the rear corridor. She hesitated, then moved, slipping away as people shouted and confusion bloomed. Jack caught Victor's reaction, the flash of irritation, the sudden violence of purpose returning, and knew he had bought seconds at best. Somewhere outside, beyond walls and snow, the dog would sense the shift, would understand without words that waiting was about to end. Jack braced himself as Victor raised the pistol fully now, the polite fiction abandoned, and felt a grim clarity settle over him. Whatever happened next would follow him out of this room, but for this instant the girl was moving, and that was enough. Snow whipped sideways through the service exit as the night finally tore open, revealing how thin the walls between luxury and terror had always been. The rear corridor spat Jack and the girl into the cold like a judgment. The door slammed behind them, muting the restaurant's music into a distant lie, and the wind seized Jack's breath hard enough to make him stagger. He tasted winter, clean and brutal, and welcomed it because it was honest. The girl ran without looking back, shoes slipping on ice, red fabric a moving target against the white. Jack followed, not shouting, not urging, trusting motion to carry meaning faster than words. He felt the old rhythm snap into place, the one that did not care about age or titles or what a man did for a living now. He was aware of everything at once, the echo of boots behind the door, the angles of the alley, the way the river wind funneled sound, the distance to the curb where his taxi waited. His mind did not narrate any more. It executed. Fear did not vanish, but it took its proper place, a warning light rather than a command. The door burst open behind them, and sound followed, sharp and decisive, no longer pretending. Jack cut left, pulling the girl with him, forcing the pursuit to choose between speed and certainty. The alley narrowed, snow piling unevenly, trash bins turned into cover and traps. He felt a flash of anger at how easily the city offered tools for violence, and then that anger cooled into focus. He had not planned this, but he had trained for it, and training was what remained when plans burned away. Ahead, the taxi's lights glowed faintly through the swirl, a small domestic miracle amid the chaos. Jack's chest tightened at the sight, not with relief, but with responsibility, because the dog would be there, waiting as promised, and Jack had learned the cost of broken promises. A suppressed crack cut the air, too close, and Jack shoved the girl forward, his shoulder slamming into brick, pain blooming and then dulling as adrenaline claimed it. He did not look back. He could feel the hunters fanning, feel the geometry closing again, and he knew the only way to break it was noise and movement. He hit the key fob hard, the taxi answering with a sharp honk and flashing lights, an ungainly beacon announcing that this story had witnesses whether anyone wanted them or not. The dog's presence surged then, a living force at Jack's side, not barking wildly but placing itself where it mattered, blocking a line, drawing attention without drawing fire, acting on a trust that did not question outcomes. Jack felt something in his chest loosen at that, a knot he had not known how to name. He opened the rear door and pushed the girl inside, hands firm, voice low and absolute, telling her to get down, to breathe, to stay. She obeyed, not because she trusted him as a hero, but because she had nothing left to trust, and he was the only thing still moving. Jack slid behind the wheel, engine roaring, awake, and for a heartbeat he hesitated, not from doubt, but from calculation. Running would save them for seconds, maybe minutes, but it would also turn the chase into a cleaner hunt. He chose instead to make space. He swung the wheel hard, headlights flaring across the alley mouth, forcing the men to flinch, to reassess. The dog leapt forward at his command, not to attack, but to disrupt, a blur of intent that made weapons track and hands shake. Jack felt a grim satisfaction at the loss of their elegance. Predators hated being seen struggling. Another shot sparked against metal, and Jack answered with motion, the taxi fishtailing deliberately, snow and slush spraying like a curtain. He remembered a convoy once, a narrow road, the way chaos favored those who created it first. He did not aim to hurt. He aimed to live. The street opened, traffic sparse but present, and Jack drove into it, not speeding blindly but threading, using normalcy as cover. Sirens wailed in the distance then, not yet for them, but close enough to change calculations, close enough to fray patience. In the rearview mirror, he saw the figures hesitate, saw the moment where certainty cracked That was the window. He took it, turning hard, disappearing into a side street where the snow fell heavier and the lights were fewer. His hands shook then, just a little, the delayed cost of holding himself together. He breathed through it, grounding on the simple facts, the engine's vibration, the dog's steady presence, the girl's sobs turning into breaths that counted. He felt the ache in his shoulder assert itself and welcomed it too, because pain meant he was still here. As he drove, he thought of the woman who had called him, of the courage it took to signal danger when safety had always been assumed, and he understood something bitter and clarifying about wealth and fear. The radio crackled uselessly, and he shut it off, preferring the honest sounds of the road. He did not know if the men would follow, did not know how many turns he could buy, did not know what this would demand of him next, but he knew the shape of the path had changed. He glanced once at the mirror, meeting the dog's eyes, and saw there not expectation, but readiness, a promise kept on both sides. Ahead the river vanished into falling snow, and behind them, somewhere beyond sight, a decision had been made to continue the hunt. Jack tightened his grip on the wheel, feeling the old clarity settle again, and drove toward the only shelter he could trust, aware that the night had not finished with them yet. Snow thinned into drifting flakes as the city widened ahead, sirens threading the night while the river reflected a bruised glow of streetlights and consequence. Jack kept the taxi steady as the side street spilled into a broader avenue, tires humming over slush with a sound that felt like breath returning to lungs after a long hold. The girl's sobs softened into measured inhales behind him, and that change mattered more than distance or speed. He checked the mirror once, not to look for pursuers, but to confirm presence. The dog alert, anchored by purpose rather than fear, and the girl alive, her fear no longer the kind that paralyzed. Jack's shoulder burned, a clean pain that cut through the fog that PTSD sometimes left in its wake, and he welcomed it because pain obeyed rules. He did not run blindly. He drove like someone who understood that survival was often an argument with time, not a sprint. The sirens grew closer, then multiplied, their sound rearranging the city's calculations. Jack slowed deliberately at a light, letting normal traffic swallow them, letting anonymity do its quiet work. He felt the urge to keep moving, to outrun what had started, but he resisted it, choosing instead to end things where witnesses could exist. He turned toward a well-lit stretch near the river where patrol cars often lingered, trusting patterns learned over years of late shifts and early mornings. The girl spoke then, a few broken words about the woman who had called the taxi, about money and fear, and a truth that had made her a target, and Jack listened without interrupting, understanding that explanations could wait, and listening could not. The dog's presence pressed into the moment, not demanding praise, simply holding the line that said, "Stay." When the first patrol car slid into view, Jack felt something inside him release, not relief, but completion, the sense of a task carried to its proper end. He pulled over smoothly, hazards blinking, hands visible, choices clear. Officers approached with the careful urgency of people trained to expect lies, and Jack met them where they were, voice steady, facts clean, nothing embellished. He told them about the restaurant, the alley, the shots, the men who had hunted rather than robbed, and he watched understanding replace skepticism as details aligned with calls already in motion. The girl stepped out wrapped in a blanket someone produced from a trunk, her gratitude raw and unshaped, and Jack nodded once, accepting it without ceremony. The dog stayed close, eyes tracking movement, trusting Jack's calm as instruction. An ambulance arrived, lights painting the snow red and blue, and a medic checked Jack's shoulder, the brief sting grounding him further in the present. Across the street, the older woman appeared, escorted, composed now that fear had somewhere to stand down, and she met Jack's gaze with a look that acknowledged debt, without presuming intimacy. She spoke quietly to an officer, offering names, places, the leverage that had failed her until it had not. Somewhere upriver, radios crackled with updates about suspects contained, weapons recovered, a perimeter closing, and Jack felt the night finally begin to loosen its grip. Statements followed, then, more waiting, the slow administrative choreography that came after violence, and Jack answered questions until the edges of the story were secure. When an officer asked why he had gone inside the restaurant at all, Jack paused, searching for language that would not turn a simple truth into a speech, and said only that someone had asked for help, and he had heard it. The answer seemed to satisfy, or at least to end the question. Hours later, when the snow had softened to a whisper and the city resumed its patient breathing, Jack was released with a bandage and a quiet thank you. He walked back to the taxi, the dog pacing beside him, and sat for a moment without turning the key, letting the engine's silence be earned. He thought of the promises he had made to himself after leaving a life that had demanded everything, promises about quiet and distance and not being seen, and he understood that those promises had never been about avoiding action, but about choosing it honestly. He drove then, taking the long way home, the river keeping him company, the night no longer pressing so hard. At a red light, he glanced at the dog and felt the weight of loyalty settle into something lighter, something that would carry him through the nights ahead. When the light changed, he moved with it, another car in the flow, another man allowed to be ordinary again, knowing that being ordinary sometimes required one extraordinary refusal to turn away. Sometimes miracles do not arrive with thunder or fire from the sky. Sometimes they arrive quietly, behind a steering wheel, in the heart of someone who chooses not to turn away. God does not always remove the storm, but He places courage inside ordinary people so others can survive it. In our daily lives, when fear tells us to stay silent, faith invites us to stand, to help, to love, even when it costs us something. If this story moved you, let it remind you that no act of kindness is ever wasted, and no cry for help is unheard by heaven. Please share this story with someone who needs hope. Leave a comment to tell us where you're watching from, and subscribe for more stories of faith, courage, and quiet miracles. May God bless you, protect you, and walk with you through every storm.